Now we're going to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 23149 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out revisions to this week's business. Could I call on the Minister to move this motion? Thank you very much. Now I believe Elaine Smith would like to speak against this motion. Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yes, I rise to oppose the business motion on behalf of Scottish Labour. And I do so with regret, as this could have been avoided if the Government had consented to the COVID restriction scrutiny that was already agreed to by the Parliamentary Bureau and had been notified to MSPs. Instead, public scrutiny by this Parliament has been reduced and curtailed with announcements made to the press and not to Parliament. That is completely unacceptable in such a serious situation where lives are being lost to the virus, draconian restrictions imposed and livelihoods adversely affected. The Bureau had agreed to a statement by the First Minister today with questions from members. This was at my request, as I felt it was vital for as many MSPs as possible to be able to question the First Minister directly following recess and scrutinise the effectiveness of the strict 16-day measures that Scotland had been subjected to. The Bureau had then scheduled for tomorrow a debate to discuss the Government's approach to COVID-19 going forward, and then vote on the matter tomorrow to allow MSPs to give their views on the new proposals. It would have given members the time to digest the complicated new plans that the First Minister is now instigating in her latest attempt to slow the spread of the virus, and to consider replies to the myriad of questions that would have been posed by MSPs on behalf of the people that we are elected to serve. I also requested consideration of a recall of Parliament last week, as I was concerned a major announcement might be going to be made at the First Minister's daily press conference. As Labour's business manager, I have consistently argued that the First Minister must make major announcements to Parliament in the interest of democracy and scrutiny, and not at press conferences. However, others on the Bureau at that point did not favour a recall, and I understood that this was because no major announcement was expected and that there was due to be a ministerial statement today to allow for parliamentary scrutiny. But of course, a major announcement was made last Thursday, affecting hundreds of jobs, particularly in the hospitality sector, keeping them closed for at least another week and retaining restrictions affecting people's rights and freedoms. No consultation was undertaken before the 16-day lockdown, and we were all assured by the First Minister that this was, and I quote, short and sharp action to arrest the worrying increase in infection, and she promised to keep the Parliament updated. Well, obviously it's not short and sharp, because it doesn't seem to have worked, and Parliament has not been updated. We're being sidelined with the cancellation of today's statement and question session, and the people we represent are being left with no answers to their many questions. I think this is even more galling because the First Minister has been keen to say that she's open to scrutiny. So why not by members of this Parliament today with questions? Presiding Officer, we're also being asked to support a motion today to simply note the Scottish Government's decisions, not to agree or endorse, as has been trailed in the media, but just to note, which means we are merely observers. What is the point in voting on that when we're simply being asked to note? Why is the Government avoiding having its actions and plans subjected to questions, and instead of simply wanting a debate on a motion which asks us to take note, and when the majority of slots are allocated because of DeHont to the SNP? And why are other parties going along with this? Presiding Officer, we're now at a point where Parliament must have a much greater role in scrutinising the Government on COVID, particularly when they're dictating their plans rather than fully involving all parliamentarians in these decisions. The people we represent have been harmed in many ways, not only by COVID-19, but also by the actions taken in the response to tackle it in terms of their mental and physical health, their financial situation, the loss of their freedoms, their human rights and their civil liberties. So given the gravity of this, we as parliamentarians need to be able to thoroughly scrutinise the First Minister and her Government to ensure that their actions are proportionate to the level of threat facing society, and we need disclosure of the full facts to be able to do this. The Parliament is not being given that opportunity today, in fact, nor tomorrow, and therefore, regrettably, I have to move against the business motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call the Minister for Parliamentary Business, Mr Day.
Presiding Officer, when the Bureau by majority approved this week's changed business plan, it not only sanctioned the staging of a 3-hour-long debate on COVID restriction changes, but an extended topical questions session. The primary thinking behind that was to accommodate as many COVID-related questions as reasonably possible, and members will note that 4 of the 5 questions that you, Presiding Officer, have selected today are very much COVID-themed. Unfortunately, the opposing of business had the potential to eat significantly into that additional time and thereby reduce the opportunity for those members selected to ask their questions and others to raise topicals. Alive to that, the Bureau returned to the matter a couple of hours ago and agreed a further 30-minute extension to decision time to ensure that we would preserve the maximum opportunity for questions. Presiding Officer, on behalf of the Bureau and in keeping with our desire to afford optimum chance for colleagues to participate in the extended topical session, I'll conclude there, save to ask members to approve the business motion and furthermore allow Parliament to get on with that and debating in detail the COVID-19 strategic framework.
Thank you very much, Minister. Point of order, Elaine Smith.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. I wondered if you could clarify in the standing orders whether it's the Bureau that agrees the number of topical questions and what those are, or if it's yourself as Presiding Officer.
The question of topicals is for my choice. However, we did ask the allocation of time is a question for the Bureau to recommend, and it's actually a decision for the whole Parliament. So it's a decision that's put to members, and members decide on the allocation of time. On that note, I'm going to put the question. The question is that motion 23149 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We're not agreed. Now, clearly we're going to have a vote, so I'm going to summon members to the chamber and also let members remotely know that they can dial in. So I'm going to suspend proceedings until we get members onto the remote access voting system. Parliament is suspended for a few moments. Thank you very much, colleagues. We're going to resume business now, online and in the chamber. Now, we're going to resume with the question. The question is that motion 23149, in the name of Graham Day, on the revised business motion be agreed, and members may cast their votes now. This will be a 1-minute division. Thank you very much. The result of the vote on motion 23149 in the name of Graham Day is yes 83, no 22. There were no abstentions and the motion is therefore agreed. Thank you. Now, before I move on to the next item of business, I wanted to make a few remarks of my own. Members will be aware that I've spoken in recent weeks about 7 months on from the imposition of restrictions, that is, about the need for Parliament to reassert its vital role in scrutinising the very difficult decisions that ministers are taking, often necessarily with some urgency. Colleagues on the Parliamentary Bureau are continuing to discuss how we can create more and earlier opportunities for accountability and participation in the policy choices affecting the daily lives of the people we represent, the impact those decisions are having on the economy, and the best ways to keep people safe. This is a Parliament-led approach, shaped by all members and one that recognises the significant role of committees. I hope colleagues will take the time to contribute any thoughts, comments or practical ideas on how we can improve COVID-related scrutiny before the Bureau's meeting next week. Sitting alongside this work, I will continue to explore with the Minister for Parliamentary Business and Veterans how we might create more consistency and transparency for members and indeed the public in relation to how announcements are being made. And finally, can I emphasise to all members that I am determined to ensure that Parliament's position is respected and that you have the opportunities and time you need to raise your concerns on behalf of your constituents. Thank you. I now turn to topical questions, and our first question this afternoon is from Neil Findlay. Mr Findlay.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports of at least 14 deaths at Red Mill Care Home. And, Presiding Officer, tragically, earlier today I'm advised that number is now 15.
Thank you, Mr Findlay. Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
My first response to that and the thoughts of the Government are with the residents, the staff and the families with loved ones at Red Mill at this time, and our condolences go to those families who have sadly lost relatives. Dedicated daily support is being provided to the home by NHS Lothian and the Health and Social Care Partnership. This includes the provision of support in the form of staffing and support with infection prevention and control measures. The Care Inspectorate is closely monitoring the home and has undertaken an unannounced inspection of the home to ensure the safety and well-being of the residents, with a further return inspection in hand yesterday and today.
Neil Findlay.
Presiding Officer, the situation at Red Mill is heartbreaking, and my thoughts and prayers are with all the families of the bereaved. And the care home staff, many of whom have been affected by the virus themselves and who have been going way beyond the call of duty, trying to help residents at this awful time. No one, and I mean no one, has contacted me to complain about their commitment to residents during this period, but many families and staff have raised concerns about confusion and delays over testing. Why did it take 6 days for whole home testing at Red Mill? Did residents become infected and subsequently die during that delay? What type of support has been provided by the NHS? And is it right that agency staff potentially working across different homes are working at a home with such a significant outbreak? And what action has been taken to keep COVID-positive patients and COVID-negative patients safe during this time? Would the Cabinet Secretary comment on these important issues?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Mr Finlay for raising those questions. I did reply to him following the last time he raised this in the Chamber at Topical Questions with a series of points which I replied to on the 9th of October. I understand he's also received correspondence from both NHS Lothian and HC1. That all said, though, there are a number of issues that do need to be addressed. The Care Inspectorate will provide me with their view following their second inspection, their return inspection, which, as I said, is happening yesterday and today, on what the level of improvement is required, whether improvements that they highlighted in their unannounced inspection have been followed through, and if not, what they believe should be done about that, what action they might want to take as a Care Inspectorate, but also what action we might take as a government. My understanding is that at the moment, Health Protection team are in the home twice a week to test residents and staff. But it does feel to me, in this as in other areas, that communication with residents and their families in particular, and indeed with staff, could be considerably improved. And I'm very happy to take that on and see whether or not we can ensure that there is greater transparency in the information and the updates available to those individuals in particular, but also, of course, here as elsewhere, to the local members representing the individuals in those care homes.
Neil Finlay.
Families indeed have raised the lack of communication with them and the lack of answers to very basic questions such as, has my mum or dad been tested? When was she tested? What was the result? And why am I having to find out more, or why am I finding out more information from the media than from HC1? Why has my loved one not been admitted to hospital for treatment when they are seriously ill? The government says it is being straight with people and transparent, but just because it says that doesn't mean it is true. Every bit of information that people are getting is having to be dragged out of, whether that's HC1, the NHS, or indeed even the Care Inspectorate. These are basic questions families are asking, and they and staff deserve so much better. So, Cabinet Secretary, will you ensure that families get straight answers to their straight questions? And can you advise why relatives believe elderly people are still being denied hospital treatment?
Cabinet Secretary.
So to the latter part of Mr Finlay's question, no, I can't answer that at this point because I have no information about what the specific instances might be or what the clinical decisions have been made around any particular individual. And you wouldn't expect me to have that because I am not a clinician and I don't make those decisions. However, on the first part of his question, and of course if any family wants to write to me about that, then I would take that seriously and look to see what further information I could provide to them. But on the first part of his question, I think my track record on making sure that our health boards in particular are clear with families and relatives and patients, and in this instance residents in care homes, is there for members to make a judgment on. I am very keen indeed that everyone gets the information that they need timeously and in a language that is easily understood, and that their questions are answered. And if they have repeat questions, those repeat questions are answered. That is central to the kind of health and social care system that we should have. As far as HC1 is concerned and what they as a private sector provider do, I can require them and request them that they answer those questions, and I can take that up with the Care Inspectorate as well. But the bit that I can make sure happens is what happens from NHS Lothian and through them from the Health and Social Care Partnership, and I will take that on board, and I hope perhaps with Mr Finlay's assistance and any other member with a constituency interest in this area be clear in my mind about exactly what are all the questions that families want to know the answers to right now, as well as putting in place a system that allows them to be regularly and properly updated.
And Neil Findlay.
Thanks, President Officer. HC1 have provided more information to me than the NHS or the Health and Social Care Partnership or the Care Inspectorate combined. And the key point of this, Cabinet Secretary, is families should not have to write to you. Indeed, they shouldn't even have to write to me to get these answers. They should be given as of right. It is their families and they deserve transparency.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I agree with that. Families should not have to write to me. But if it is the case that HC1 is giving Mr Finlay more information than either NHS Lothian or the Health and Social Care Partnership, then HC1 should be giving that information to families without waiting to be asked and without having to use Mr Finlay as the conduit to do that. So HC1 has a clear responsibility here as the provider to provide that information to the residents and families in the care home for which they are receiving money to run and make sure that care home is properly provided for. I will deal and take up the question with NHS Lothian and through them the Health and Social Care Partnership, and I'm confident that Mr Finlay will join with me in pressing HC1 to be as transparent with residents and families as they are with him.
Brian Whittle to be followed by Andy Whiteman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think regularity in staff testing is vital in preventing the spread of COVID-19 within care homes, and I think we all understand that. I think the tragic case mentioned by the member and the evidence from some of the rest of Scotland highlights that the system in place is perhaps not working quite as well as it could. So can I ask if the Cabinet Secretary will commit today to publishing the data on how many care home staff are tested and the frequency of those tests?
Cabinet Secretary.
So that data is published every week. In terms of the number of care home staff who are tested on a weekly basis. As Mr Whittle knows, I think the staff testing in care homes is undertaken using the what is called the satellite channel, part of the UK Government's Lighthouse programme. That satellite channel has, despite a number of efforts, had the least consistent test turnaround times. And in order to improve that and also to free up capacity in the Lighthouse programme, as he knows, we are transitioning this testing in care homes to the NHS labs, and that will be completed, and the completion of our 3 new regional NHS lab hubs, which will come on stream from early November, building to full capacity by the middle to the end of December, providing an additional 22,000 tests per day. That allows us to have greater control over the speed of those test turnaround times, and the NHS, as the member knows, has an average turnaround time for the tests it processes of 27 hours.
And Andy Whiteman.
Thank you. I'd too like to express my condolences to all those who have lost loved ones as a result of this outbreak. After these new outbreaks in care homes, questions will be raised about how exactly the virus was able to enter and spread through the care homes involved. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will the exact reasons for this outbreak be revealed in due course, including what role, if any, the availability of PPE might have played?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I thank the member for his question. As he knows, we commissioned Public Health Scotland to undertake work on the discharge of patients and admissions of patients into care homes, looking at a range of data. That involved working with the University of Edinburgh and the University of Glasgow, and they will publish their report tomorrow. I have offered to not only write to the committee with the link of that report, but they have offered to give a briefing to the Health and Sport Committee on the work that they undertook, the basis on which they gathered the data and the basis on which they have reached their conclusions and recommendations. In addition, however, I have commissioned a root cause analysis on the recent occurrences of outbreaks in our care homes. to understand why that is happening in a system where we do have confidence in the distribution and supply of PPE when providers are asking us for it, and the Care Inspectorate is inspecting on that as well as anything else. And the Care Inspectorate is also inspecting on the basis of infection prevention and control, and we have testing and we have the primary care wraparound. So I need to understand too what is the basis on which the infection, or what is the route by which the COVID infection is entering care homes, and what more is it that we need to do. And I hope to be able to update the member on that root cause analysis, but also on the steps we are taking in the near future in the Chamber when I publish the Winter Preparedness Plan for adult social care.
Thank you. Question 2, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government what analysis it has carried out on the impact of the most recent restrictions on both health and the economy.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, decisions on protective measures are taken on the basis of public health advice from the National Incident Management Team, chaired by Public Health Scotland, and then on a broader 4 harms assessment by senior clinical and policy advisors, looking at the likely impacts of protective measures not only in reducing transmission of the virus, but also on wider health, society and the economy. The impact is closely monitored and is taken into account in considering whether to maintain, ease or strengthen measures that are currently in place.
Sarah Boyack.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer? Will you publish that impact so that we can inform our constituents as to the background to the Government's current work? And as the strategy is now to move from 4 phases to 5 tiers, what is the baseline that the Scottish Government has adopted, which will inform policy decisions on the 5 categories of measures which were published last week and which will lead to decisions on local restrictions from next Monday, which the First Minister, I understand, is going to announce on Thursday?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Government publishes a significant amount of the evidence base that underpins the decisions that we take in this respect, and the evidence paper, there was an evidence paper produced as part of the information that was put into the public domain before the October recess. We've also, in our dialogue with local authority partners, shared a vast amount of data and information in relation to the prevalence of the virus and the circumstances in which the virus is spreading. That takes into account many of the questions that Sarah Boyack has raised, but of course if there is other specific information that Sarah Boyack believes would be helpful for the Government to publish, I would be very happy to consider what that information would be. In relation to the baseline for the levels framework that the First Minister set out on Friday and which is the subject of debate later this afternoon, the level 0 is essentially the position that we reached when we entered phase 3 of the route map out of lockdown, which essentially enabled a significant proportion of our economy and society to reopen. 96% of our businesses reopened, our schools reopened, our colleges and universities returned, and many aspects of people's lives came back into a resemblance of normal. That is the baseline of the levels framework, and obviously each individual level indicates a degree of more serious challenge in different localities, and that issue, as I say, will be discussed by Parliament this afternoon.
Sarah Boyack.
Will the Cabinet Secretary accept that even though we got a raft of information this morning as MSPs to inform the discussions that we have this afternoon, we don't actually have the first issue that I asked you about, which was the impact of the 2 weeks that we've just experienced in terms of restrictions? We need to be able to demonstrate to our constituents what works, what doesn't work as well as is needed to inform their habits and to inform their compliance with the new restrictions that we're all going to be issued from next week. So you've talked about the 4 harms analysis, and you've talked about indicators, 5 indicators that are mentioned in terms of informing the levels that you're adopting. Can we have a clarity on how those relate and how these will inform the decision that the Government will take this week, which will put us into the new levels? And can we demonstrate what has happened thus far, which will inform those decisions? Because reading the paperwork, it doesn't actually give that clarity that our constituents are all asking for, regardless of what position they're coming from.
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, one of the challenges there is in addressing that question is the fact that often the gestation period for the virus requires sufficient time to pass for us to see the effect of the restrictive measures that we are taking place. So, for example, the restrictions that were applied for 2 weeks just shortly before recess, and which we have indicated we will extend for a further week until the 2nd of November when the new levels framework comes into place, is essentially one gestation cycle for the virus. And it will be, as a consequence of that, we will see the progress of the measures that have been taken to tackle the virus. I would say to Sarah Burke that the best means of us identifying what works is what is the impact on the prevalence of the virus. And we can see from the data, the extensive data that's been published, and indeed the data that is published on a day-by-day basis by Public Health Scotland, on a neighbourhood-by-neighbourhood basis of the prevalence of the virus, gives some of the strongest possible detail and the fine detail about the effectiveness of some of the measures. So, for example, we are seeing in parts of the country, if I take the city of Aberdeen, for example, which has gone from a very acute situation of infectiousness some weeks ago to a position where it is a much lower prevalence of the virus because of the measures that have taken place. Other parts of the country have moved in the opposite direction. So there is a data available. This is the material that I'm currently discussing with local authority leaders as we prepare for the application of the levels framework, and I have further calls in that respect very shortly that I will have to return to enable us to have the proper and full dialogue with local authority partners about how we take forward these decisions.
Thank you very much. We've got a number of supplementaries here. Maurice Golden to be followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Aberdeen and Edinburgh show the biggest fall in jobs vacancies of anywhere in the UK during this crisis. How can local economies be expected to recover if the SNP's business support measures are failing to such an extent?
Cabinet Secretary.
I simply don't follow the logic of Mr Golden's incoherent question. The government is putting in place support commensurate with the resources that are available to the government. We are assisting individual local economies and businesses to be able to deal with the current circumstances. And the issues that Mr Golden raises about the performance of the Aberdeen and Edinburgh economies are a product of a global pandemic which all governments are trying to tackle, and doing so by putting in place the commensurate business supports that are available to us. If Mr Golden was perhaps to put any muscle he has to encouraging the United Kingdom government to deal with Scotland in a level and fair way compared to how they're dealing with England, and provide the Finance Secretary with the degree of flexibility that has been given to England, it would certainly help to address the core of Mr Golden's question.
Alistair Allen to be followed by James Kelly.
Given what the Cabinet Secretary has just been saying, what representations will the Cabinet Secretary be making to the UK Government about the financial assistance needed now to help Scottish businesses and employees get through this economic crisis?
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, the Government is in regular contact with the UK Government on this question. Indeed, the Finance Secretary was involved in a Finance Minister's quadrilateral just last week, and she continues to make vigorous representations to the UK Government. Indeed, she did so again in a further letter on the 20th of October. And this matters because the support that's been available to businesses in Scotland has been a combination of the financial support offered by the Scottish Government and also the details of the furlough scheme that's been available from the United Kingdom Government. Now, Dr Allen will be familiar with the fact that the furlough scheme has been severely curtailed in its effect as a consequence of decisions by the United Kingdom Government. We are urging them to revisit those decisions to enable us to have stronger financial support in place for businesses to complement the assistance that's available from the Scottish Government.
James Kelly to be followed by Christine Graham.
Presiding Officer, reports yesterday that North and South Lanarkshire are being considered for Tier 4 restrictions have been met with anxiety across the local region. Any move to Tier 4 would undoubtedly result in job losses and businesses closing. So can I ask the Deputy First Minister what financial support will be put in place to avoid a catastrophic impact on local communities? And also, can I ask, when will the decision be taken in relation to Lanarkshire, and what interaction will take place with local council leaders, local business leaders and also parliamentarians?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, in relation to the situation in North and South Lanarkshire, Mr Kelly is correct that in the correspondence that the Government issued to the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, we set out the detail that emerges from the National Incident Management Team that I referred to in my answer to Sarah Boyack, that suggests, based on the current prevalence of the virus, there are concerns that potentially could see North and South Lanarkshire allocated to level 4 within the framework. I'd stress to Mr Kelly that the Government would wish to avoid that if at all possible, but we have to be cognisant of the evidence and data put in front of us by our public health experts. In relation to the interaction with local authority leaders, just before I came into the Chamber, I spoke to the leader and the Chief Executive of North Lanarkshire Council. When I leave the Chamber, which it's a helpful point for me to say to you, Presiding Officer, I will leave, once I've completed my question, to go and speak to the leader and the Chief Executive of South Lanarkshire Council to hear their perspectives. And I have to say the call I had with the leader and Chief Executive of North Lanarkshire Council was a very helpful call in providing some of the clarity and the specific information about what that authority is doing seriously to tackle this issue. So I would reassure Mr Kelly, because I appreciate this will be anxious for people in Lanarkshire, that the Government wants to avoid that designation if we can, but we have to be cognisant of the evidence. In relation to financial support, the Government has set out the measures that are available to support business over that period, and we will continue to have dialogue with businesses. The Economy Secretary has been involved, as is the Rural Economy Secretary, with the hospitality sector, an extensive dialogue with the business community over the weekend. And I hope that gives some reassurance to Mr Kelly about the way in which the Government is approaching this issue.
And Christine Graham to be followed by Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With COVID data being published locally, and I note what the Deputy First Minister says, discussions with local authorities, can I ask if it's considering applying restrictions by local authority area and not health board area? Because currently Midlothian in my constituency is lumped in with the City of Edinburgh, putting it in the same possible tier with all the restrictions which flow from that for businesses and individuals in my constituency, which may not be suitable.
The building blocks of the levels framework will all be by local authority area. That is a move from where we have been so far. So when the Government takes decisions, and I omitted to answer Mr Kelly's point about timing, about decision making, we expect to come to final decisions on the first allocation of levels on Wednesday evening, Thursday morning, with regulations put before Parliament on Thursday. And those will be regulations that set out by local authority area what levels they are going into. So it will be done by local authority, not health board area.
Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was listening to the response to Sarah Boyack's question. So in terms of the gestation period, hospitality is now being closed for over 2 weeks, so presumably can't be a source of transmission. So will the Scottish Government be able to tell us where exactly transmission is taking place to assist with the understanding of the decisions that are being taken?
Cabinet Secretary.
My point about gestation of the virus is that the contacts that take place between individuals, the virus is spread by human transmission and by contamination of surfaces. And the gestation period is not automatically related to how long a sector has been closed. There can be or operating on a restricted basis, because there are elements of hospitality that are still operating. There will be seeds of the virus within the community. What we are trying to do is to reduce the prevalence of that virus. Now, what I can say to Elaine Smith, because I know that she takes a close interest in the Lanarkshire area, is that we are seeing a slowing up of the rate of increase, which is optimistic. It's not going to decline yet, but the rate of increase has slowed, which is welcome as part of the decision-making process in which we are currently involved.
Thank you very much. Question number 3, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support is being given to hospitality businesses that cannot operate due to COVID-19 restrictions.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing.
The First Minister announced on the 21st of October an extension to the restrictions imposed on the 9th of October and further additional financial support for the businesses affected by the restrictions. As such, more than £40 million will now be distributed through the COVID-19 Restrictions Fund. That includes grant support for hospitality and other businesses that are required to close by law.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response? My constituent Dave Barclay runs the Airlie Street Bar in Alyth in Perthshire. Like many traditional pubs, it has no outside space and does not serve food, so the current COVID restrictions mean it has to close. If Mr Barclay's pub were in the central belt of Scotland, he would be entitled to a grant of £4,310. Because he is in Perth and Kinross, he will get just £2,155, precisely half that amount. Mr Barclay thinks this is central belt bias. Is he correct?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't see it in that light. The grants will be available from the 2nd of November, as outlined in the strategic framework announced on the 23rd of October. Grants of £2,000 or £3,000, depending upon rateable value, will be available by businesses required to close by law. A hardship grant, depending upon rateable value, will be available for businesses that remain open but are directly impacted by the restrictions, and these grants will be provided regardless of level to any eligible business and paid in fortnightly instalments. Presiding Officer, I'm acutely aware that the impacts on the hospitality industry across the board have been horrendous, have been catastrophic, and I'm happy to look at any individual case where the member writes to me, and will do my best to be as sympathetic as possible. And that's what we're all seeking to do, because we desperately want to provide the financial support to enable businesses to make it through to the other side of this crisis. And one of the challenges is we don't quite know when that will be. But I undertake the member to look sympathetically at any case where I have the full details in front of me and can consider them in the detail and with the time that each individual person and business deserve.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, because Mr Barclay's position is he's not required in law to close, but the practicality is not having outside space and not serving food. He has no alternative because he can't run his business in any other fashion. Of course, as the Cabinet Secretary accepted, there are huge problems right across the hospitality sector. We learned today that the historic Queen's Hotel in Perth is facing permanent closure with the loss of jobs. We know the Scottish Government has received an additional £700 million from the UK Government, making the total additional funding in the current financial year from the UK Government up to £7.2 billion. How much of that money has now been allocated to support the hospitality sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
A very substantial amount has been provided to support the hospitality sector since this crisis began some considerable time ago, and I'm very pleased that local authorities and the enterprise agencies have stepped up to the mark and worked extremely hard to get that money out. And indeed, we have sought to at least match what funding has been available down south. And I'm acutely aware of the impact of hotels in rural locations, such as that mentioned by Mr Fraser. I know that the HIE and the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency have devoted a lot of time to speak to individual businesses, to help them where they can. I myself, with my colleague Fiona Hislop and others, was able to set up the Pivotal Enterprise Fund and the Creative Tourism and Hardship Enterprise Fund, totalling respectively £121.8 million and £23.5 million. These were funds which have gone some way to address the problems. And I'm not sure, actually, that there has been any counterpart fund of those types in England, nor the Hotel Support Programme of £14 million or the new lease of Self-Employed Hardship Fund. But this isn't a competition. I mean, although we've done better in England in some areas, perhaps Mr Fraser would argue that the converse is true. I don't know. He hasn't yet. But my job really is not that. My job is to try to make sure, working with my colleagues, and particularly Ms Forbes and Fiona Hislop in Finance and Enterprise, to make sure that we reach out to every business and provide them with the hardship financial support that they need to bridge the gap to the other side of this crisis. It's not an easy task, and it's one that we've sought to engage with the UK Government on from the outset. And I must say, Nigel Huddleston, the Tourism Minister, has been very helpful and constructive, but we haven't had the detail, I think it's fair to say, as the Deputy First Minister earlier said, about the most recent announcement of £700 million. We simply haven't got the detail of that yet. I hope that we will soon.
Some supplementaries. The first from Patrick Harvey, to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've been contacted by constituents in Glasgow and people from elsewhere in Scotland who are working in hospitality businesses who've been told by their employers not to install the Protect Scotland app on their phones or to keep their phones switched off while they're at work. Some who've been contacts of positive test cases and have been told not to self-isolate by their employers, and that if they do, it will be treated as unauthorised and unpaid absence. What action can the Scottish Government take against some of these employers, some of them high street, very well-known high street names, both in hospitality and in retail? What action can the Government take against employers who so dangerously put their business interests ahead of the lives of their workforce and their customers? And does the Scottish Government support the Unite Hospitality Rescue Plan, which involves routine, regular testing for hospitality workers and bringing sick pay for those in isolation up to full pay?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as a matter of general principle, of course, employers have an absolute duty to cater for the safety of their staff and their customers. Of course they do. No one could conceivably disagree with that. And everybody must recognise that that is a fundamental duty. Mr Harvey hasn't actually mentioned any specific example. If he has any specific examples, of course, then I will consider those should he wish to write to me, and it's correct that I do so with colleagues. But I should say, and this is the last thing I'll say in the interest of brevity, that by contrast, I have been in touch as much as anybody, I think, in this chamber with businesses over the last 10 months on a daily basis, including this morning. And I have to say that the overwhelming majority of business leaders take the responsibilities extremely seriously. And not only that, but they have invested very substantial amounts of money in the protection of the safety and the health of their staff and their customers, as well as taking all steps to make sure that appropriate training is regarded. So I do hope and believe that the types of behaviour Mr Harvey refers to are the exception and the relatively small exception, not the rule. But I hope he will understand that unless we get specific examples, it is difficult for me to go beyond what I've said today. But I will, of course, look at any specific case that he wishes to refer to me and do so very carefully.
Rhoda Grant, to be followed by John Mason. Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Further to Murdo Fraser's questions, pubs that don't sell food and don't have outside spaces are, to all intents and purposes, forced to close because they cannot make a living out of selling soft drinks on its own, and therefore the Scottish Government is shirking its responsibility by saying they can stay open and sell those soft drinks. Therefore, can I appeal to the Cabinet Secretary that the same support is made available to them as those who are legally obliged to close, because we know that cafes and restaurants are allowed to stay open till 6 o'clock to deal with isolation and loneliness, while those pubs actually serve that same purpose for men who will not use cafes and restaurants, and therefore their mental health is at stake, and we need to preserve those businesses.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I understand the point that the member makes, that Rhoda Grant makes, as Mr Fraser. I understand the point he makes, and of course she has accepted that the closure is not required by law. It's a de facto matter rather than an ex lege matter. But nonetheless, she makes a not unreasonable point. The grant system that we've come forward has got a closure fund and a hardship fund, and the funding must be relatively clear, and I believe that we have set it out clearly. But of course, this is a debate. This is an ongoing debate where we are considering how to respond most appropriately to the public, accounting for public money, but also recognising private need. And therefore, I hear what she says, and obviously we can give further consideration to these matters. But as matters stand, such premises are able to trade lawfully, albeit, as she says, in some cases, there may be a very limited market for a pub that is unable to sell alcohol.
And John Mason.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I take the Cabinet Secretary's point that we don't want to compare all the time with England, but it does appear that the Chancellor has given an open-ended cheque to English businesses, and that does not appear to be available for Scottish businesses. So can he confirm that this is unfair for Scottish businesses and that either the Scottish Government should have these powers or Westminster should be providing the money?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do think that, without making a political point, the fact that we don't have clarity about the £700 million announced 2 weeks ago simply means that from a legal point of view, from Kate Forbes' point of view, as Finance Secretary, governed by strict rules with regard to the disbursement of public money, that until such time as there is a proper exchange of information about that, the situation is just not acceptable. And she did write, as the Deputy First Minister said, to the Chancellor of the Exchequer on the 20th of October. So that's a relatively long time ago in COVID. So I do respectfully suggest that the full details are provided as soon and as swiftly as is possible. That will allow us, I think, better to go on with the job that we all have in trying to serve the people of Scotland.
Thank you. And question number 4, Bruce Crawford, who joins us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it considers the impact will be in Scotland of the introduction of VAT on PPE.
Minister Ben Macpherson.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government firmly disagrees with the UK Government's decision to reintroduce VAT on PPE at this time, and we will be pressing for this decision to be reversed. Unfortunately, this decision was taken without consultation with Scottish stakeholders, which has made it extremely difficult for us to analyse the impact that this will have in critical areas. This UK Government decision is likely to be of significant concern to many stakeholders, including social care providers, who are already working hard to ensure that those within social care settings are provided with sufficient PPE over the winter months, and will now be worried about the impact of this VAT cost increase.
Bruce Crawford.
Minister, for his response. When I first heard that VAT was being put back on PPE, I thought, surely this is a joke. It cannot be a serious proposition. Does the Minister agree with Donald McCaskill, the CEO of Scottish Care, who said to put VAT back on PPE in the middle of the second wave of COVID-19 is pure madness? You just made saving lives 20% dearer. Time for a rethink, Rishi Sunak. Minister, I agree 100% with Donald McCaskill on this. And has the Scottish Government made representation to the UK Government on this matter?
Ben Macpherson.
Yes, I also agree 100% with the sentiment from Donald McCaskill on this issue too. The Scottish Government agrees that it makes absolutely no sense to remove this VAT relief at this time. The decision from the UK Government was unexpected and was made, as I said, without any consultation with Scottish Government officials or stakeholders. We believe it should be reversed, and we will be pressing the UK Government on this.
And Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, President Officer. Thank you, Minister. Has the Scottish Government done any assessment about what the additional cost will be to the Scottish Government, local authorities and care providers? And does the Minister agree with me that the Treasury decision to impose this mask tax simply must be reversed? It has the potential to do significant harm and undermine the fight against COVID-19.
Minister.
Given the lack of notice and the unexpected nature of the decision, as I said in my previous response, we are now in the process of carrying out an urgent assessment the additional costs of this decision, including for care providers. And as Mr Crawford alluded to, in these times, if the UK Government should be considering anything, it should be extending the relief to help those protect against the virus, for example, to face coverings, rather than putting it back on PPE. And just for context, if we consider the extent of the taxation powers that the UK Government has at its fingertips, I am astonished that they are choosing, in order to raise revenue, to make this decision in terms of deciding to remove this VAT relief on PPE, rather than, say, introduce, for example, something like a windfall tax. So we will be pressing them to reverse their decision on this, and will engage as constructively as possible with all Scottish stakeholders and continue to assess the impact of this decision. But like I said, we will press for its reversal because it is the wrong decision.
Thank you. And question number 5, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will publish details of organisations with whom Test and Protect data can be shared, and for what purposes.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
As the member would expect, privacy and data security are very important to the Scottish Government, but also to the NHS in Scotland. As Test and Protect is made up of a number of different strands, covering testing, contract tracing and the Protect Scotland app, a number of data protection impact assessments have been undertaken. These set out what data is collected, how it is shared, with whom and for what purpose, and are accompanied by relevant privacy notices where appropriate. The Scottish Government already publishes details of organisations with whom Test and Protect data is shared and for what purposes on the main NHS Scotland Information Governance website. Data is shared only as strictly needed for public health purposes. But whilst the information is available in many documents, I'm very happy to commit, if the member would find it helpful, to bring all that together in one document.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the Health Secretary persevering through that response. Of course, how such data is shared is clearly of public interest. The Test and Protect system relies on public confidence. If people stop freely sharing information for whatever reason, then the system cannot work. Professor Stephen Reicher, who is advising the government, said sharing contact tracing information with police is, quote, the perfect way to stop people getting tested and providing their contacts. The fear of reprisals can't outweigh the public health priority of finding out where people have been and the contacts they have had. If people stretch the rules, isn't it better to know that?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I'm grateful to the member for his supplementary question. Can I just assure everyone that is not a persistent cough, nor have I lost my sense of taste or smell. The member is absolutely right, and I agree with Professor Reicher. We do not, and the NHS Scotland do not share personal information from any of the Test and Protect exercises with the police. In fact, personal information is not shared with government. Personal information is only shared with boards for follow-up, so that they can follow up index cases, and with local authorities so they can follow up in offering the support, the in-reach support for those who've been asked to self-isolate. But as I've said, I am very happy in one single document and make it available to all members and lodge it in SPICE to bring together all the organisations with whom data is shared, as well as personal data, and for what purpose, so that everyone can see that and be assured, and then therefore able to reassure their constituents about the seriousness with which we take the privacy and the collection of data in order to ensure people have confidence in the Test and Protect app, but also in the Test and Protect process.
Liam MacArthur. Thank you, and can I thank the Health Secretary for that reassurance. Can I maybe seek a further reassurance? Last Thursday, the Scottish Government statistics reported a 72% increase in fraud. We know already that Test and Protect has been mimicked by fraudsters. If the system is going to work, people need to know that they can trust Test and Protect callers. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore set out what people should be looking for so that they can know that the real Test and Protect is on the line?
Cabinet Secretary.
I am very happy to do that. I don't have the detail of that with me, and I wouldn't want to get any part of that wrong because it is really important. So this afternoon, my office will send that information to Mr MacArthur, but also in a note to all members, so they are clear that there is a very particular process that Test and Protect contact tracers go through in order to assure the person that they are contacting that they are from the NHS Test and Protect programme, and to assist in avoiding anyone who is attempting to scam that exercise.
Thank you. And a supplementary from Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, can data such as personal phone numbers gathered by the Essential Test and Trace system be used to enforce isolation on those who have been contacted after their contact with an infected individual?
Cabinet Secretary.
We can't enforce isolation on any individual, just as we can't make people follow the public health guidance. What we have to do is convince people of the benefits of doing that, including self-isolation, hard though that is, to protect themselves, their families, but also in that collective exercise to protect each other. This particular virus and how we deal with that is different. It is genuinely a public health response, which means that the decisions I make have an impact on everyone in this chamber as an individual. I don't mean as the Cabinet Secretary. So if I choose not to wear a mask walking around this building, or I choose not to wash my hands, or keep 2 metres distance and so on, that risks everyone else that I come into contact with. So I do that not just to protect myself and those that I love, but also to protect everybody else. And that is what we require. So we can't force people to do these things, but we do recognise that self-isolation is quite a big ask of individuals in different circumstances. 14 days is a long time. Their personal circumstances may make that difficult. Earlier, I remember, talked about the financial difficulties that that can bring to people. So that is why we've taken some steps, as much as we can, both to offer financial support to some individuals in those circumstances, but also to have that contact through our local authority colleagues to offer any other support that might be needed in terms of getting food, walking the dog, whatever it might be, so that people can follow that self-isolation that we really do need them to do.
Thank you, and that concludes Topical Questions. We'll move on shortly to the next item of business.